Hello, welcome to another edition of your favorite parliamentary news magazine program, The Chamber, right here on Citi TV. On this platform, we bring you the very best of what has transpired in Parliament in the past week. Of course, we bring you closer to your members of Parliament. My name is Mensah. Opoku. We'll take a break. When I come back, we'll delve into what we have for you this week. If you have missed out on the major stories in Parliament in the week, you may not have had time to follow our bulletins. But what we do with the recap segment is to bring back all the major stories in Parliament, curate them into one segment for you to at least be able to catch up on what MPs have been doing in the past week. So here's the recap for this edition. The team from the International Monetary Fund will begin negotiations with government on Wednesday. Ahead of the negotiations, MP for Bolgatanga Central Isaac Adongo has a few suggestions for government.
When they say they have the men, they have the men. You see where they are. They should look for Kwame Pieni immediately. He's the one who can save them to lead this team. They should go and get Ishmael Jansen to be there. Get Sam Jonah, the best brains of our country. Because this job is the equivalent of 1983 challenge. It's not child's play. When you are spending 129% of all your revenues to pay debt, interest payment and the rest, it is not child's play.
On the floor, Deputy Minister for Energy, William Orekwedu, answered questions. He revealed the cost of GMPC's corporate social responsibility projects from 2017 to 2019. He also responded to questions on rural electrification projects across the country. MP for Chirponi, Abdurazak Tahidu, was not enthused about the fact that some parts of his constituency were not captured as part of the ongoing projects.
Even 2020 election, I have to use my own personal pocket money to connect about 2 communities more for them to enjoy this national grid. So hence, I'm making much appealing to the Ministry of Energy to see how they quickly award some of these communities so that we can also enjoy this national grid. Because electricity will enhance so many things. It will encourage our children to develop the habit of reading and reading, studying in the night, during the day, and the community women will not move from far to far to mill their grace.
The Privileges Committee at a closed-door meeting first gave the opportunity to Ayawaso Central MP Henry Korte to explain why he absented himself from Parliament for 15 days without the Speaker's permission. But Adjoa Safo did not show up either in person or virtually. Henry Boachi-Adom is a member of the committee.
According to the report we received from the clerk of the committee, who actually served on the member at his place of abode, he's a pigeonhole. He served also from the ministry, where he's a minister of state, Honorable Ajasafo. So it's not, it's on leave. So that is what is actually holding the committee to take a decision, because it's apart from leaving the president, who actually appointed her as a minister, who can fire her, that today or tomorrow. But we being the committee, we have to report to the House.
On the floor of the House, Minister for Interior, Ambrose Derry, answered questions on the non-payment of compensation to victims of the Idra unrest a year after the committee's report was published.
Mr. Speaker, I am informed that the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice has received medical report from Konfanoche Teaching Hospital on the injured persons to determine the perimeters due the victims. Notwithstanding, the Office of the Attorney General has requested victims to provide them with all medical receipts on which they are awaiting response. Mr. Speaker, the 3 victims will be compensated when all administrative processes are completed. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, permit me to inform the House the families of the 2 deceased persons have been compensated.
He also responded to the issue of the lack of logistics for the security detail of MPs.
Available police records indicate that 62 police guards assigned to MPs are yet to be issued with pistols. This is attributed to the fact that there have been exponential demand for the supply of arms from the army of the police to the police personnel assigned to be bodyguards for MPs, judges of the Supreme Court, ministers of state, and senior police officers. Efforts are, however, underway to procure additional arms and ammunition for the Ghana Police Service to enable and cater for the remaining 62 bodyguards and others assigned to the judges of the Supreme Court, ministers of state, and senior police officers.
The minority also at a press briefing called on government to accept full responsibility for the resort to an IMF program.
President Nana Addo Dankwa and Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia should take full responsibility for incompetently managing the economy to suffocating debt level, which has necessitated the retreat, for us to request an agreement with the International Monetary Fund for the restructuring of our debt. As they take full responsibility, they should. They should also take responsibility for their reckless and irresponsible borrowing and unjustified profligate expenditure, which has led us to the journey of retreat.
The National Cathedral project has been dogged by a series of allegations. The latest is an accusation about the alleged unlawful withdrawal of money from the consolidated fund for the project by the Minister for Finance. Samuel Okujeto Ablakwa is MP for North Town.
We revealed that in flagrant violation of Article 178 of the 1992 Constitution, the Finance Minister, on the blind side of Parliament, has instructed, not once, not twice. We have put out 3 series of withdrawals from the consolidated fund without parliamentary approval. And you know that the 1992 Constitution is very clear. If you do not have an approval, you cannot dip your hands in the consolidated fund and withdraw public funds. Now, the latest in this unending saga.
The Minister for Information, Kojo Opoku, was on the floor of the House to answer questions on the protection of journalists in their line of duty.
Successfully validated and followed up for correction the report of alleged assault on Citi FM journalists on the 11th of May 2021. Mr. Speaker, I must state that even though the National Media Commission has started well, their efforts have been challenged mainly because of a lack of financial and technical resources. This has affected the pace at which they handle cases that are reported to them. While we continue to encourage the NMC to stay on course on this path, we also appeal to development partners and other stakeholders to support the NMC to enhance its operations. Mr. Speaker, when the report of attacks on journalists are brought to our attention, government quickly condemns such attacks and engages the police to identify and prosecute offenders. The Ministry of Information recently condemned attacks on journalists at Radio Adan and Benya FM and urged, through direct interactions with the police to act with dispatch against the perpetrators.
He also touched on the latest Rapporteur Sans Frontières report, which saw Ghana slip on the Global Press Freedom Rankings.
FS Press Freedom Index, as published recently, actually means. It is important to state from the onset that the RFS has amended the methodology. And therefore, press freedom, in accordance with their methodology, is not just about the security of journalists. Indeed, the security of journalists is one of 5 parameters that they measure. They measure the media landscape itself, the political context, what they call the freedom, the legal framework, the economic context, and then the security of journalists. Mr. Speaker, to enable Ghana, not just the executive branch, or maybe Parliament, or one civil society organization, to enable Ghana come to a certain common understanding of what this report is, I called a meeting of the key stakeholders in the sector at the Ministry of Information earlier this month to jointly peruse and analyze the report.
Minister for Fisheries, Mavis Halcomson, also attended upon the House to respond to questions. The floor segment this week is the Honourable MP for Yapekuso in the Savannah region, the Honourable John Jinapo. Government, we're told this week, is beginning negotiations with the IMF team. As you may well be aware now, the Government has committed Ghana to a fund program with the IMF after months of back and forth in relation to the balance of payment issues that the country has had over the period. Government has largely blamed COVID-19 and the Russian-Ukraine war, these external shocks, as the main reasons why they are heading to the IMF. First of all, let me engage the Honorable John Jinapo. First of all, how did this come to you, especially when as late as 2 weeks ago, the Deputy Minister of Finance was on the floor of Parliament indicating the government trusted its homegrown solutions and thus they were not going to the IMF?
Well, I'm not surprised because we kept cautioning government, especially in the early part of 2019, that they were heading for a ditch, but this government would not listen. Lo and behold, like you said, even as at last week, they insisted that they were not going to IMF, only to surprise everybody by informing us that the economy was suffering, the economy was in a difficult situation, and so they needed to go for an IMF program. We were told that the team would start yesterday. Even before they start, this government has once again come here with another request for a $1 billion facility in terms of a loan. It is this same borrowing that has brought us into this ditch.
Well, I thought that was part of the budgetary framework.
No, then why are they here? This is a fresh request. They are going to have free exim, and then they are going to Rand Bank to borrow. And when you look at the amount they want to borrow from Rand Bank, the 250 million, they want to cumulatively pay an insurance of about $50 million on the 250 million. That is unacceptable. At a time when you are engaging the IMF, one would have thought that they will pull the brakes, open up the books, look at the real costs even before you start borrowing. But even before you engage the IMF, you still continue on this reckless borrowing. This is unacceptable. We must not allow this to proceed. The information here is so scanty, is so opaque, it's just not enough.
That means
you
that
don't
the
even
minority
know.
will not support this 250.
I hope so. You don't even know exactly what they are going to use the money for. All they say is budgetary support. It is this same opaque global headline figure of budget support that has led us into this ditch. What exactly are you going to use this money for? It is not stated yet. And when you look at the terms, it is so bad. Worst of all, President Akufo-Addo is not going to pay even one cedi of this loan in terms of the principal. They are deliberately pushing for a grace period so that when the NDC assume office in 2025, we would come and bear this burden. Already the 1 billion they borrowed from the IMF, we'll start paying it in 2025, 2026. And you are now going to add this burden. So you don't want to share any burden. You want to borrow the money, spend it today, and then future government would come and bear the brunt. That is unfortunate. We must not accept this.
But the negotiations, we're told, have begun already. Yesterday, the IMF team was at the presidency. This morning, we're told negotiations have already begun with the Ministry of Finance. Hopefully, the Finance Committee, which you're a member of, may be let into the loop in terms of the negotiations. But for you, as we stand, as the country stands with the state of the economy, what is the best possible program the country can negotiate for?
First of all, there has to be austerity. Government itself must reduce its size. Government itself must be disciplined. And government must prioritize, not to engage in those frivolous expenditures that we see. Tell me, NAPCO, they keep paying them. What do? They themselves said they were cancelling it. They've not been able to do that. And so you are having a lot of waste, a lot of frivolous expenditure in the system, which really doesn't add on to the economy. And now you want to go and borrow another 1 billion. With very, very opaque information, hiding all kinds of things from us, with very exorbitant rates and terms, and then trying to spend the money today only for future governments to pay. This is unacceptable. We must not allow this to go on, and this must not go on.
If you were the Minister for Finance, first of all, many have said that because of his previous utterances, he shouldn't be leading the negotiations. That's one. But if you were him at this point in time, you look at your social intervention basket, you look at your expenditure basket, what are the things? Because we are told that you would have to, first of all, propose your program to the fund. And then at the staff level, they will look at how they can polish it up and see if they can give you milestones that you will meet for which the monies will come into your economy.
If I were the minister, I'll resign, that's all. Because there's nothing he can do. Even when you propose very good suggestions to him, he will mess it up. So if I were him, the right thing to do now would be to save the president the embarrassment and resign. That's all.
So I've been joined by a Member of Parliament for Ho Central. He's a chartered accountant of so many years standing. He understands the workings of international finance, international business, and economics. He's on the Finance Committee of Parliament. And I also engage him on the question of the IMF. The Honorable Benjamin Podo is my guest. Honorable Podo, first of all, let me take your preliminary comments on how the decision, when you saw the letter signed by Kojo Opoku, your colleague here, indicating that the country was going to IMF for a balance of payment support. What were your preliminary thoughts?
As a matter of fact, we had expected that should have been done much earlier. Some 1 year back, just soon after 2020, it should have been done. You see, we ended the Mahama program in 2019. It should have continued.
Really? You should have sought an extension and not to walk out of the program?
Exactly so. But soon after that, because it helped, all the claims that they had done very well in 2017, 2018 was all due to the IMF program, which was
the consistent growth of about 5% and all was because of the
result of the IMF program, which we left for them, which they inherited. So they should have continued with all that IMF made us to do, so that there will be discipline in the economy. We will have the fiscal consolidation going on. We will have the buffer which we had left behind. You know, the sinking fund, the stabilization fund. We should have continued with those things. You see, when you are borrowing money and you are not making plans to repay, your lenders get worried. So when they came and abandoned the sinking fund, it was a signal to the market that there was some trouble coming. So we expected that they should have continued with the programs that we were running with the IMF before they took over.
Okay. So so now let's say, you saw the kind of, because you were on the Finance Committee then in the Mahama era, and during those negotiations, they met the Finance Committee of Parliament as well. In those deliberations, anytime those members of the IMF, the staff level who were doing those negotiations came, they met the team. What is it like to be in an IMF program?
Yes, it's a matter of discipline and then confidence in the economy. See, we are all living in an interconnected world. So the people who lend money to us or who support us in various ways are looking at our performance. And IMF, if you think that they don't know what is happening, they know every detail on a daily basis. They have a country representative here. So they are watching what is happening and they churn out the information. So even when we give information which is contrary to what they have, they draw our attention, because under Article 41, the IMF Charter, you have to provide information that is accurate. So if you don't, they themselves will come out with what they know. So our idea is that there should not be any hiding of information. Give the information all that you have to them. Then when they can assist you, they tell you what you should do. So that's how it was done. And that's what will be done even now, that we should get the accurate data and let IMF tell us how far they can help. But if you continue to hide data, you think that you are doing so, but they have the real things, and that will make them back away. Yes.
So what's the best possible program Ghana can get?
Well, we are talking about homegrown solutions. The major problem is that of profligacy. Our expenditures are too high. If you match the expenditures with our revenue, they are not going anywhere. We have consigned more than half of our revenues to debt servicing, particularly interest payments alone. So where are we going? This is a result of the borrowing, the unrepentant borrowing that we found ourselves in with this government. So most of our expenditures are on interest payment and other commitments such as compensation. But what do we do with the rest of the money which we borrow? For instance, the nurses training allowances, the teacher training allowances, the other one which many people are so familiar with, the flying in the air with the expensive chartered jets. So if we can cut down on this, what are the benefits of the planting for food and jobs? Is it real? Is it real that we are planting for food and for jobs? So we have to review that program. The free senior high school program also needs to be reviewed. So when we look at all the gamut of things that we have been doing with our money, and we find out that they are not all beneficial to us, we have to review them properly. And in that way, we can cut down on our expenditures, and then, we are good to go.
The IMF evokes fear in the hearts of many. The name just IMF evokes fear, especially workers. And TUC has stated in no uncertain terms their opposition to this resort by government. They say it's tragic. And under the MELS program, we saw the net freeze on employment into the public sector and all of that.
Yes, you see, when the economy is expanding, you need more people to handle it. So it's a question of prudent management such that for employment to grow, the economic activities must also grow. You see the point? So the question of employment, which TUC fears, or a freeze on employment, which TUC fears, will not arise when there is proper economic growth. You see, when there is the real economic growth, not the fake one, not the fake one. So you see, it doesn't have to be problematic for TUC, even if we go to IMF, because it is with the IMF that we saw growth, real growth in the economy. So they don't have to fear IMF program, because when we are disciplined, we achieve fiscal consolidation, we reduce our borrowing for consumption. When we reduce the borrowing for consumption, then the economy will grow, and when the economy grows, more people will be employed. So there shouldn't be any fear that IMF will come and stop further employment.
Last question. Many say the finance minister should not be leading the negotiations because of his own comments about the IMF in the past. We're a proud nation, we'll go to IMF and all of that. Where do you stand?
My stance is that he has no commitment to IMF. He has denigrated IMF. He has told Ghanaians that we are not going to IMF. How can he, in his own conscience, be at the front of this negotiation? He should give way. He should give way. So that somebody who understands IMF, who is not proud to talk with IMF personnel, to lead the negotiation.
There are those who say that he's the one who has superintendent all over all of this. Nobody can present a better case as to the state of our economy and where we've been and where we've come from than him. So why must he leave office?
But he is saying that he does not want the IMF. So why should he go? Why should he lead the team? He doesn't want IMF. IMF is in itself not a devil institution. We joined IMF in 1958. Kwame Nkrumah's time, we joined IMF. And in about 60s, late 60s, he went for a program with them. So what is exactly wrong with IMF? So that when people say we are going for IMF program, then everybody is shaking. It should not be that. We are all members and we contribute. Even this government, when they were shouting, we don't like IMF. During COVID, we got $1 billion rapid credit facility. So I didn't understand him why he was shouting hell at IMF. So he doesn't, he has not positioned himself well to talk with IMF. So if I were him, I'll give way for those who think that IMF can be helpful to us, to talk with them. He can provide the necessary information because the Ministry of Finance is not a single man's ministry. We have the staff there, we have the deputy ministers, we have professionals over there. They can provide the data with him, but to be the leader is something that is not acceptable to many of us. But in all this, it's the president's doing. It's his uncle, so he doesn't want to leave him. You know that position of Minister of Finance has to do a lot with loyalty. Even competence sometimes is taken away. So, and that is why we are experiencing it. But this is not the moment where we should be, we should find ourselves in blind loyalty. This is blind loyalty.
Joined by Member of Parliament for Takoradi, Western Regional Minister, the Honorable Kwabena Mensah. Honorable, this must have been a very difficult decision for government to take, for the country to go to the IMF, especially when all had pointed to the fact that government will try and find local solutions to the problem.
Yes, I believe that COVID has necessitated some of these decisions because after COVID, Africa has been built to need over 400 billion to come back on track of progress. So definitely anybody that had discounted or continued to discount COVID, I believe that person is just misleading himself and others, because COVID has been a major difficulty for every government in the world, even the US and the rest. And if you look at the way we had fought COVID, you should understand that we had put in so much to fight COVID. For instance, if you take America, that has a population of about 332 million people. Over 1 million of them died because of COVID, with all the investment they did. Ghana, which is about 1/10 the size of America, only 1,400 people have died out of COVID. So clearly, it shows you that if we are not putting the investment that we have done during the COVID period, more than 100,000 Ghanaians would have died. So clearly, for me, this is an investment that was necessary because we all know how to bring back the economy. And you also know that the IMF, we subscribe to the IMF. So if you're a businessman, for instance, and you're having difficulties with your company, it is your bank that will definitely have the first interest to make you survive. So I believe that it is not anything extraordinary for people to be complaining. I believe that is the right decision. It's like declaring HIPIC. Ghanaians didn't want us to declare HIPIC, but we've all seen the benefit of HIPIC. So I strongly do believe that it is also very important that Ghanaians accept this decision that we have taken in good faith for us to work on so that we can bring back the economy on track. And then the Ghanaian people can feel the good times they want to feel. That has been eluded as because of the COVID pandemic.
But what kind of program should government be negotiating for? If we were part of the negotiators meeting this IMF team, trying to agree to a staff level agreement before a fund approval, with all the issues our economy is facing now, what kind of program should we be negotiating?
I believe that any program that we negotiate should be a program that will ensure that we can grow the economy. That's the basic thing. Because only when you're able to grow your economy, they can pay your debt. So the basic fundamental of this is that government should be looking at negotiating with them for bigger amount of money so that we can use it to invest in the economy, to grow the economy. And that should be the basics.
There are those who say that based on past comments or statements that have been made by some members of government, the finance minister, he shouldn't be leading these negotiations.
I don't subscribe to that notion because he has been in the thick of things of the economy. He has to be part of it so that it can bring to fore the issues that the economy has really faced. You should also understand that the finance minister works for the president. You can have his own opinion. The fact that you have an opinion is not the opinion of the president. I mean, people, all of us, all over the country, ministers, DCs, chief executives. We represent the president in one way or the other. The fact that you have an opinion about a matter doesn't mean that it's final. It is what the president says is final. And I believe that he has done very well for the economy. The Minister for Finance has done very well. When the economy was growing, nobody said we should be sacked. And in this case in particular, COVID, for me, I see it as an accident. It's not something that was being told to do something, he's not doing it. Because all the time the economy was growing and we're getting all the numbers right. So if there had been an accident, which is the pandemic, which has thrown a lot of things overboard, naturally it should not be singled out for punishment. I believe that at least he has now even the experience to understand that these pandemics create certain problems, and you'll be the best person to advise government on the way forward and how to get things done.
Very well. The IMF minister has sat there. So, Honorable Minister, let me invite Honorable Member. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Kodu Oponkroma, since you mentioned his name, I don't know, of late we've been seeing him talking about IMF program. I don't know whether he's coming to give us a brief on the IMF program.
No.
Mr. Speaker, because he looks like the chief negotiator of the IMF program.
Yes, leader.
I see my colleagues, the excitement, the faces of colleagues, and clearly my colleagues are responding to the ever responsible leadership that the Minister for Information has shown over the few days. So I see my colleagues are excited, and they are commending the Minister for Information for good work done so far. But Speaker, on a more serious note, Speaker, in these matters, we always defer to you. I'm sure it's a slip of the mind. Speaker, you had said that IMF minister, if I could plead, that is a sponge from the records. He's actually the minister responsible for information and not.
I want to be sure what my colleague, the majority whip, said. Did you say it's the minister responsible for misinformation, or what did you say?
Colleague, we just returned from the Pan-African Parliament, and he knows I'm referring to. And when we went to Pan-African Parliament, myself and him had some private discussion, and he was full of praises for the Minister of Information. He was full of praises. And on a more serious note, I said, Minister, read my lips, the Minister responsible for information, the ever capable Minister. That's what I said.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on a lighter note, the Minister responsible for information is also responsible for curing misinformation. Mr. Speaker, since June 2019, the Ministry of Information, working closely with the National Media Commission and other key actors in the media space, initiated a number of interventions aimed at safeguarding media freedom in the country. One of such is the establishment of the coordinated mechanism on the safety of journalists. The mechanism seeks to achieve 4 key objectives. 1, to provide regular training for state and non-state actors on the safety of journalists and the need to ensure that journalists and media practitioners are not harmed for the work they do. 2, to provide annual accountability platforms for reported infringements against the safety of journalists or against journalists. 3, to provide validation of reported infringements on the safety of journalists. And 4, publication of annual domestic reports on the safety of journalists. The Constitution and Article 1661 provides for the establishment of the National Media Commission to, among others, quote, promote and ensure the freedom and independence of the media for mass communication or information. Pursuant to this, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Information requested the National Media Commission to execute this mechanism. The Ministry provided set-up support to the NMC and requested other affiliate bodies to extend additional support. The NMC, using the industry of this office, has been instrumental in the training of journalists under the Media Capacity Enhancement Program. This is in line with the first objective of the mechanism. Additionally, the NMC, through the industry of the office, successfully validated and followed up for correction the report of alleged assault on Citi FM journalists on the 11th of May 2021. Mr. Speaker, I must state that even though the National Media Commission has started well, their efforts have been challenged mainly because of a lack of financial and technical resources. This has affected the pace at which they handle cases that are reported to them. While we continue to encourage the NMC to stay on course on this path, we also appeal to development partners and other stakeholders to support the NMC to enhance its operations. Mr. Speaker, when the report of attacks on journalists are brought to our attention, government quickly condemns such attacks and engages the police to identify and prosecute offenders. The Ministry of Information recently condemned attacks on journalists at Radio Adan and Benya FM and urged, through direct interactions with the police to act with dispatch against the perpetrators. Further, I have also made strong appeals to the judiciary to punish severely persons found guilty of attacking journalists. This was contained in my statement to judges during the sensitization for members of the bench and prosecutors on the Press Freedom Sensitization Workshop, which took place in Ho on the 20th of June 2022. On a regular basis, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of the Interior also updates us on the status of investigations of some of the key reported attacks in our jurisdiction. And we continue to urge them to quicken the pace of investigations where those investigations remain open. Mr. Speaker, to conclude, I want to call on stakeholders to support the coordinated mechanism for the safety of journalists to ensure that it delivers what it has been set up to achieve. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Not necessarily a question, but I should seek your indulgence and leave to make the comment. And Mr. Speaker, as I listen to the Honorable Minister for Information, I'm concerned about the rights and freedoms of the media and their independence. And Mr. Speaker, to remind him that I do not get the understanding that the media is under the Ministry of Information. Neither do I want to accept that the National Media Commission is under the Ministry of Information. I see you as also even as Minister for Information, subject to the regulatory mandate of the National Media Commission as established under Article 162 to 167 of the Constitution. But Mr. Speaker, in answering your question, you said advocacy. We don't do the allocation here, so be strong at Cabinet to say that the President must make enough resources to support you and to support the National Media Commission. Parliament, you know, we are helpless in this matter. Mr. Speaker, as I said, is a comment. Because the National Media Commission, as you know, I serve on the Special Budget Committee, even monitoring equipment in the country, they do not have. If anybody goes on a local language and says something damning, which tears this country apart, we will not be able to respond appropriately. So I sympathize with you, but I don't want to go home with the notion as if you are extending your ministerial powers beyond the IMF to regulating the national.
Very well. Minister, I don't think this calling you to respond.
Matter of concern to myself, primarily also because I am still a practitioner, even though I practice in a different capacity now, and it's a matter of collective interest to us. Mr. Speaker, first, it is important to clearly understand what the RFS Press Freedom Index, as published recently, actually means. It is important to state from the onset that the RFS has amended the methodology, and therefore press freedom in accordance with their methodology is not just about the security of journalists. Indeed, the security of journalists is one of 5 parameters that they measure. They measure the media landscape itself, the political context, what they call the freedom, the legal framework, the economic context, and then the security of journalists. Mr. Speaker, to enable Ghana, not just the executive branch, or maybe parliament, or one civil society organization, to enable Ghana come to a certain common understanding of what this report is, I called a meeting of the key stakeholders in the sector at the Ministry of Information earlier this month to jointly peruse and analyze the report. Mr. Speaker, when we're done with that analysis, and this had the various media stakeholders, including some of which I have mentioned earlier, when we're done, it became obvious that according to the 5 parameters assessed under the new methodology, Ghana scored very high in terms of the legal framework, 81.42%, the social-cultural context, 79.64%. Ghana also recorded above average and moderately high scores for political context, that is 66.61%, and security of journalists, 62.25%. Security of journalists, 62.25%. The only parameter in which Ghana performed below average, which dragged us very heavily on the composite score, was the economic context, 47.22%. And by economic context, RFS refers to the poverty of individual journalists and media houses. And the facts are clear in this country that because we have opened up the media landscape extensively, which is a very good thing, a number of media houses have sprung up, a good chunk of which struggle to make ends meet. Indeed, I think even this week you will find reports in some of the media or on some of the media platforms about media houses struggling to pay salaries. And the RFS contends that when journalists are not paid, the ability to do a sacrosanct free job is questionable. And they score us very, very low on that. When media houses are not able to make ends meet, the ability to do independent and sacrosanct journalism sometimes is brought into question. And so, Mr. Speaker, when the various stakeholders had the opportunity to analyze this report, we came up collectively with a number of recommendations. And I'd like to outline a few. One, we agreed that we should work in collaboration with the National Media Commission to deepen the execution of the coordinated mechanism on the safety of journalists, which deals with the question of the security of journalists. That is just one of the 5 pillars that they measure. We also agree that we have to collaborate to deepen education for state and non-state actors in particular on the safety of journalists. Because, Mr. Speaker, as we are finding out, sometimes the attacks on journalists are perpetrated by non-state actors who have respectfully some very limited understanding of the role of the media in a democracy like ours. We also agree that we want to address the RFS concern about the poor economic condition of most journalists in the country. And we will do that by advocating for and engaging media associations to improve working and economic conditions of my colleague journalists. Mr. Speaker, we also agree that we want to collaborate in the fight against disinformation and the spread of fake news. Earlier, we were making light of comments in that area. But, Mr. Speaker, the RFS report mentions that it is one of the major contributors to our low ranking in terms of the Press Freedom Index. The detail of the report outlines all of that. And we need to be a bit more aggressive in fighting disinformation and the spread of fake news. We have to do that, however, by balancing whatever actions we take with respect for the freedoms that our Constitution upholds. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, were you anticipating this particular supplementary question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, because as you prepare for these questions, you must have a certain understanding of the key issues in the public domain that you should respond to. So, yes, Mr. Speaker, we're anticipating.
Yes, Honorable. Elaborate in very details steps and measures that his ministry and other agencies are putting in place to ensure the safety of journalists and the practice of journalism. May I take this opportunity to just find out from him whether there's any new update on the death of Ahmed and whether his ministry is taking some other steps to fast track whatever information that is there so that we can bring finality to the death of Ahmed Swaleh. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank my colleague for the question. Once again, we will reiterate our commiserations to the family for that loss. Mr. Speaker, in my substantive answer, I mentioned that regularly we engage the Ministry of the Interior to get an update of outstanding matters with reference to alleged attacks on persons who are journalists. Every time we ask for an update, we are told that the police that is responsible for that investigation updates that that investigation remains open and that they are still on that investigation. Mr. Speaker, that is the latest update, even as we encourage and urge them to fast track that. That is the information that I have in response to my colleague's question.
So this week on News View, I'm talking about the IMF program that government has entered into. At least that's what a lot of people are discussing, and members of parliament have not been left out of that. Forget about the jokes that were being made about it, but it's a serious issue that our economy be committed to a Bretton Woods institution at least for the next 2 to 3 years, depending on what terms our team is able to agree on with the IMF. It's not bad per se for the country to go to the IMF, but because of the discussions, because of the deliberations and the politicization, the needless politicization that has characterized the IMF discussion in our country over the period, I mean, is what has made it look like it's bad for countries to go to the IMF. And indeed, going to the IMF is an admission that in and of your own self, you cannot keep within the remits of fiscal discipline. You can't discipline yourself to be able to spend within your limits. Of course, government is blaming Russia-Ukraine war and the coronavirus pandemic for resorting to the IMF. It may not be a bad option, but I think that for what it's worth, for all that has gone on in the period, in the past few months in this country in relation to the IMF, the president owes the duty to the citizenry to at least, this is the kind of national issue or event, or I don't want to use the word crisis, which calls for the president to speak to the nation, to candidly, heartfelt, engage the Ghanaian public about sincerely why you think we are here. Of course, we've heard what the president said when they met the AGI business captains of industry. We've also heard what he said when he was swearing in ambassadors in relation to IMF and the rest. But that's different from engaging the country. Let's see the kind of impacts the COVID addresses made. At least, of course, on turning to something else. But in the early days, people attentively were listening. There's something about the power of national broadcast. That's why Nkrumah never played with it. You know, the power of national broadcast that he should be able to bring to bear on this IMF decision. Eyeball to eyeball. Talk to the public about why you are taking this decision, taking us to the IMF, and why genuinely, sincerely, you think that that's the best way to go at this point in time. I think the president owes that to the citizenry. Secondly, this calls for us to assemble our best brains, irrespective of politics. So it's not as if only the best brains are in only one party in the country. It's not true. Even if that is the case, in the interest of national consensus and to get in the buy-in of all parts of the political divide, I think we need to assemble our best brains, not only economic management team of the Akufo-Addo administration that should be doing this. A lot more people need to come on board. Also, if you have to engage the venerable Kwame Pianim, KY Amwakon. There's so many illustrious economists for the years. Kwesi Boche, who oversaw the longest IMF program, the structural adjustment program, the economic recovery program of the 80s. They are all around, thankfully. Engage them. Scarce ideas, solutions, so that we'll put our best foot forward when we engage in these negotiations. And the point about cutting down expenditure, draining the swamp, projects such as the National Cathedral leaving the expenditure list. Because at this point in time, you're taking a second look at the free SHS and so many other social intervention programs, Agenda 111, all of these may be affected by the IMF program. But how do we negotiate in a way and manner to ensure that a lot of these social intervention programs that are impacting positively on the lives of the ordinary Ghanaian are kept, Well, we'll keep our fiscal discipline and ensure that we don't spend recklessly and keep our spending within limits. That's the major question that needs to be discussed. And for me, one major area in which we need to show that commitment is to genuinely cut down the spending. Next week is the mid-year budget review. It's a very good point for the Minister for Finance to account to Parliament on so far the savings that have been made. There were some measures announced in March. 4 months down the line, what kind of impact, or 3 months down the line, what kind of impact has these measures that were announced made? For instance, how much have we saved? The country saved from the 20% cut on expenditure. How much have we saved on the halving of fuel coupons? How much have we spent on the ban on travels? All these things need to be put out there to show the citizenry and in fact send the confidence out there into the international community that indeed we are interested, the country is interested in living within its means and being fiscally disciplined. And that's how we end Duke's View, and by extension the Chamber this week. My name is Duke Mensah Opoku. Keep watching Citi TV for the very best in programming. Next week is the mid-year budget review. I'll be here to bring you all that you need to know. Stay with us.